Okay.
What's up, Michael? This is an hour with my mom. It's great to see you. So, my guest today is Michael, and Michael holds a special place in my heart. We have been friends for, gosh, I say like maybe since 2011 or so. And so,
Wow.
Michael, yeah, here's a little interesting nugget. When I met you, I think I shared this before, but I can't remember if you recall. When I met you, I had just moved back to Sacramento and was looking for jobs, and I had gone through, interview after interview and was just not really liking what I was seeing. Had the opportunity to get a few different jobs, but just they didn't really speak to my heart. And I was reading all these damn blogs about how to interview better, how to, all that stuff, trying to find a good job. And I met somebody who mentioned that they worked at hospice and set me up with an interview. And Michael was the social worker supervisor for hospice. And so we meet in front of the hospice and we're talking for just, I think was going to be like a quick, brief 15, 20-minute interview. And again, I'm exasperated by all these interviews. And we sit down, you look at my resume, blah, blah, blah. And you asked me this question. You said, "What's your heart's desire?"
Yeah.
And and that threw me. That threw me because all these other interviews were me playing the game, me
Yeah.
fitting into the box. And I'm not a fit into the box kind of person. I was always this in my head meaning of life person. And so when you asked me that question, I was like, okay, who is this guy? What's his angle? And I thought, should I be serious about this? Should I tell him what really is my heart's desire, or should I play the game? And so I took a beat and then I said, my heart's desire is to heal people. And then you kind of nodded and then you asked me something. I don't remember what you asked me, but I remember thinking like, "Oh wow, I just met this guy and we're going into the deep end. We're having this conversation. Here's my
Hmm.
heart's desire." And we talked for 15, 20 minutes later. That was it. I heard from you a couple days later. You hired me and I was a social worker with you for 2 years. And 2 years has turned into 12 years of a dear friendship. So that's uh that's what brings you here. And normally I
Well,
ask people, who is it that you're bringing into the space? But you kind of have like a special emeritus status here. So I'm just gonna let you talk. We're just gonna talk. So
yeah, we'll see.
thank you. Thank you, Michael,
And
for
the
joining.
reality is that it's interesting for a lot of different reasons. Some I know I don't go. I actually live in the deep end of the pool,
Mm, mm,
and I think there's some grief related to that in the sense of that I shared you with before, not connecting with my mother early on, and some of those things, and I guess my life has definitely included what would be called dissociation,
mm.
but I don't like those words.
You know, why not?
Uh,
Because it's a
well,
big word now that's getting thrown around a lot, dissociation.
yeah, I just don't like any psychobabble. And and it's useful if you're a therapist. I'm licensed, but I don't function that way to check off the boxes. But it doesn't have meaning until there's a story that goes with it.
Mm,
And I know a little bit of my story and my developmental history, but also the what I think related to the story is I was looking for a safe place.
mm,
So the deep end of the pool was my safe place. And I think understanding safety, just in a kind of a general way, Maslow's hierarchy, um, that, um, dissociation, it's like, oh my God, I should have some trauma therapy. And well, maybe not,
mhm, mhm.
because if I hadn't lived in that safe space, I would have never ever asked you what your heart desire.
Hmm.
That came from my safe space.
Hmm.
And, you know, so I think I don't know, we have to, the stories are important. And we're always, one of the things I'm really convinced of is we're always trying to take care of ourselves
Yeah.
and doing the best we can. And I don't like the word best either. You
So
know,
in this interview, Michael's got to tell us a lot of what he doesn't like. So,
yeah.
but wait, Michael, let me ask you, tell me about your parents, and you say like you needed that safe space, or the deep end was the safe space. What necessitated the need for a safe space in the first place?
Well, it's a long story. So, but some I found out. I actually didn't find this out until I applied for the Peace Corps,
Mm,
and the Peace Corps included an FBI, check on
background
you.
check. Uh-huh.
And it turned out in that conversation with my parents, there was a box about a mental health history in your family. And and my father was afraid that if I didn't answer it correctly and the FBI would check on it, who knows, that would interfere with my application. So I discovered that my mother um, was, and this is back, I don't know, when is this? I don't know when it was in her lifetime. Must have been around, 1946 to 1950.
Mhm.
But she was actually declared insane
Mm.
and sent off to a mental, an asylum.
Was this
And
before you were born when she was declared insane?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
And it's always interesting with our histories of putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Hmm.
And some of them we don't know, and then some we try to fill in the blanks the best we can, and it may or may not be true. But
Hmm.
the truth of it is probably a little irrelevant if we imagine that it is our story.
Mm. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah, and that's significant. So I don't know if there's a couple things. I don't know if she ended up with postpartum psychosis
Hmm.
when I was born. And the other thing that I just found out, I was in the process of moving. That's another story. Might be changing.
Okay.
I found out that I had a sister who died.
Huh.
I never knew that before.
She died in birth?
I don't know. And, I have the records of birth. So I'm wondering if that's the death that kicked off my mom or my birth, that birth, someplace in there.
Hmm.
Um, but the absence of my mom in my early years, I didn't really have a strong sense of bonding.
Hmm.
And and then again, it's a crazy story. My dad kidnapped her from the mental health from the hospital.
Oh, really? Why?
Yeah. Huh?
Why?
Well, he knew, I think, and his intuition was right, I think. And remember, this hospital was one flew over to Cuckoo's Nest Hospital.
Yeah.
That's the context. He knew that she was never going to come out.
She was just being doped up and put
Well,
away.
whatever was going on,
Sure.
but
Hmm.
it often ended up being a one-way street.
Hmm.
So he kidnapped her out of there, and he was again smart in some ways. I mean, I don't know. He was very creative because to help her, who I didn't feel connected to because of absence, he, for lack of better words, pushed me onto her. Okay, you're going to
Hmm.
take care of Michael. Well, again, stuff we imagine, who knows? But I imagined that I was connected to my dad in the absence of my mom.
Yeah.
and now he abandoned me.
Mm. How old were you?
I don't know. I'm probably, from when that happened, I don't know. It could have been I was three, probably around 3 or 4 in that ballpark, and we went to a remote part of the state of Washington where the cops, when they're not going to waste time trying to find a mental health patient.
Right,
And
right. Wait,
and
Michael, can I ask you, did you feel a sense of abandonment at 3 or 4?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know if minus the developmental bonding early on, you know, is was I already seeking a safe space and disconnecting in a way that I didn't feel those things. Now, in some ways, you cannot not feel stuff and
Hmm.
developmental stuff,
Right.
but and it it's what was, and in that moment, it is. I was 4. I didn't read any Bowlby on developmental
You didn't
psychology.
know about secure attachment or anything
I
like
did.
that?
I didn't have any labels to give it when I was 4. It
Mhm.
was an experience.
Mhm. It was your
And
life. Yeah.
yeah, and the best I imagine is I tried to take care of myself by this going to this safe place. My parents loved me. I didn't doubt that, but that quality of bonding and intimacy, I felt, I didn't know I was supposed to have it. Does
Mm.
that make sense?
Hmm.
If you don't experience it and you think what your experience is what you're supposed to be experiencing,
Exactly.
you just are present.
Yep.
And and in that I, started creating my own worlds and going to the deep into the pool. And it was really a good place. And I would, in looking back, part of it is a gift in a way, and it's, as you know, I have a pretty active imagination.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that comes from being in the dark, in the deep into the pool
Hmm.
and creating worlds. So
So was it fair to say that like your mind was the safest place for you to go?
yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
mean, create worlds and that, I was safe in, or that I was distracted by, or that I had fun creating, or
Hmm.
who knows what. But it was I just refer to it as a safe place. Safe place related to the intimacy. I mean, I lived a safe life,
Hmm.
but there's a difference when we talk about intimacy and connection and bonding and and those things. So,
Hmm.
um, and in fact, later on, this sort of connects, I hope, for you. Um, I really got into kind of being a perfectionist to some,
Hmm.
and and Catholic education had a little bit to do with that.
Hmm.
But what I realized was I wasn't so much interested in being perfect. I discovered that if I were perfect, people would leave me alone.
Hmm.
See, that's different.
And
So
you were aware that that's what you wanted. You wanted people to leave you alone.
yeah, I wanted to stay in my space, and I didn't want to come out. Even though I think, as all of us, I think a word that I like and I'm still exploring is longing.
I love that word. I love
Yeah.
that word. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me, how do you connect to that word longing?
Well, there's a there's a emptiness related to this. When you um, and the and I don't know what the not empty feels like necessarily. So I have this intimacy or emptiness, I'm sorry. And there's a part of me that doesn't really know it,
Mm,
no, but it knows it's there and it knows it's seeking. And but I don't know what it's seeking. It just is in there as maybe I don't know Jung, but maybe Carl Jung, but maybe it's the shadow. I don't know. Um, but it when I look back, I can see it um, guiding me or directing me, or I don't know, those are the right words, but this seeking related to a longing, and sometimes not being conscious of it because it's just there. It's just there. And as I've lived through all this and reflect, I think a lot of it is the seeking is about some kind of feminine connection,
mm,
and
mm,
and that's again hard to describe in terms of what different words mean, but somehow seeking something related to mother, whether that's primal or mythological or developmental, there's that seeking. And
and put in other words, is it a desire to ultimately be cared for?
well, yeah, I think so. I think just as we're talking, I
Yeah.
think um, wanting to be able to surrender to something. And I imagine um, early on that mother-child relationship is so important, but I imagine who knows what we're feeling, but there's a place where we're being held, we're being nursed, we're something where we have total safety in that moment and we surrender to the nurturing and the love. And then, down the road, we start finding out that it's conditional to some degree. Not that
Yeah.
mothers ever
Sure.
don't stop loving you, but um, so yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that idea of like wanting to surrender to something is like very powerful. And I think that's just innate. All of us have that. And
yeah.
I'm curious for you, and I do kind of want to go back to hearing about your dad, but like, how does grief connect to the desire you had to want to surrender to something? And it sounds like you never got that ability to surrender to the thing that you wanted. Has there been a grieving process with that?
Um, I don't know. And and and
Yeah.
the thing is, I think I'm not sure what you're hoping for or looking for,
No,
but
we're just
no, I
talking,
know.
man.
Yeah, I know that. But, I would leave it at longing and not have to deal with grief. I mean, you know, um, I think grief just doesn't communicate much, that word anymore. And and there's a lot of words like that, but it's hard to use words. Well, let me put this way. That developmental experience. And when we do have loss, painful loss, that's a non-rational experience. It's a heart experience, heart soul experience. So you can't use words to describe it.
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
know, and you're asking me to describe it with words
Hmm.
that don't exist.
Hmm.
And that's, although I've gotten close to that by writing poetry. And, poetry. metaphor, silence, those are the things that hold grief, but it can't be described. Um, and and it certainly can't be codified or defined in a way that I can read stuff about grief and then know what's going on with you.
Absolutely.
Stages of this or that, and they're about making us all feel comfortable in the presence of what we can't imagine, explain, and we do a lot of that kind of thing where we try to define things and make them sound intellectual or make them sound like there's really a straight line in life when there's no straight lines in life. There's only curves and curveballs.
Truly.
um, it's we keep struggling to try to make sense out of life, and it's not meant to be made sense of. It's meant to be experienced.
Experience, exactly. It's,
And
no, Michael, this is interesting. We're talking about this because what you just said about grief, it makes me think of how, like, grief is, I just picture of it like somebody being in the mud and being really in the thick of it. And what we're trying to describe is this cleaned up, buttoned up with a suit and tie, like packaged. This is the
yeah,
grief experience that is this linear experience, which what I'm trying to show is like the vast, just the variety and diversity in grief experiences. And that it's not like, okay, 6 months later, this person's died, or and you
yeah,
feel better, or you've come to this place, or let's move on
yeah.
now.
Now, I do believe, not in the labeling, describing thing we've been talking about, but I do think there is a cultural context
Mm-hmm.
to grief. And as you know well from our time together, I think a lot about our culture is related to control. And, one little thing I talk about is we try to understand, to predict, to control. And in many, many ways, our psychological and mental health models have been trying to understand and predict and control a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all for psychotropic meds. I mean, there's a place for them, and they're thankful to have them. But it often is we're trying to control a symptom as opposed to find the story in the symptom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from the point of view of functional life, that can be a good thing. I mean, therapy is not accessible to hardly anybody
Mm-hmm.
in our culture. And the presence of that culture, what you don't see and experience, that's the most powerful stuff. And culture, we live in it. It's like a fish trying to figure out what water is.
Yeah.
It's what they know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Culture's the water.
Wait, Michael, let me go back to something. And this is kind of going back to something that you said earlier. Like, I was thinking with the longing that you mentioned, how has longing stayed consistent, or how has longing shown up throughout your life? Or has it?
Um, well, there is some ways that I'm not interested in sharing.
Of course, buddy, of course.
um, and I'll just say some of that I think showed up in my relationships with women along the journey of my life
Hmm. Hmm.
of the not necessarily conscious expectations, but related to that missing part. And just so your audience won't jump to crazy conclusions, I wasn't looking for my mother,
Hmm.
but the absence of my mother was creating the longing. That doesn't make sense, which means it might be true. Um,
Yeah.
so And then the other thing that's kind of interesting to me, I have a lot of feminine perspectives about how I see everything. And it's what's interesting is my longing is taking me to those feminine perspectives. And what's kind of ironic or paradox is that where I'm going with that energy is exactly what our culture needs.
And what do you mean by feminine perspectives? How do you define
Well, yeah, and those words are troublesome words in our time we
that?
live.
No. Yeah.
Uh, so I know if your audience will be going nuts with what I say, but in a very, very general way, or a way that I hold, feminine energy is about relationships. Okay. Masculine energy is about objects. And what happens, we're a little off course here, but what happens is one of the struggles we have in our culture right now is men are not becoming boys, I don't think. And
Or
part of
you mean
that
boys aren't
is,
becoming men?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Um, thank you. And part of that is because they're not allowed to own their feminine energy. So I don't know, I'm not sure I like the word toxic, but what happens when a man doesn't integrate his feminine energy, then everything in the world becomes an object. Resources, employees, women, etc. And you get stuck there. And and then on the other side, we have women that are struggling with not, I think, a bit with how to integrate their masculine energy. And what happens when they don't integrate their masculine energy, they treat themselves as an object.
Mhm.
And, when you think about all the things, hundreds of things women in our culture have to do with their bodies and how they have to show their bodies, it's insane. And yet, women unconsciously in the cultural water, they make themselves objects. And and so it's a dance that is not helpful to us.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the things, it's kind of an interesting dance. Men want to, if without the integration of of ourselves, we got men wanting to see everything as objects, and we got women willing to make themselves objects, and that disconnects us all from health, vitality, all kinds of things. And uh, and so related to that, there's two things I really believe. One is everything's connected to everything else. That's feminine. And we get in trouble when we deny it, don't see it, etc. And I don't know if this will make sense because it's a pretty crazy thought to many people. The highest form of masculine energy is to be generous and serve feminine energy, feminine context, and feminine space. Masculine energy is here to be generous to relationship. And I don't know if it's mythology or not, but maybe this would help is that if you imagine the earth, and we're just in a symbolic kind of way, it's life. It has the capacity for life, but it's not brought to life until the sun, a masculine symbol, brings energy to the capacity for life. So
Mhm.
feminine is this incredible capacity for life. And and men, you know, are, and the masculine energy in women too, but the masculine energy is meant to be generous to the context of relationships.
Mm.
Now, the problem with that, and you can rein me in when you want,
Hmm. Hmm.
is if everything's connected to everything, the only way you can connect with that is through the experience of vulnerability. Because there's an infinite amount of relationships.
Wait,
And
let me ask you, how has vulnerability shown up in your life? How have you carried vulnerability?
well, certainly we carry it
No, no, no,
when,
not we, you.
well, I'll say we again. I part of it is I think for myself, anytime we have what we can call loss is an experience of can be an experience of vulnerability. So it can be, when I talk about words, words can be boxes, windows, or doors.
Mm,
And so loss can be a box, and that's how we treat it in our culture in some ways. We come back to that notion of control, and we're not trying to control it. We're just trying not to be vulnerable and show our emotions. So with, not showing emotions is a way, a form of control that our culture creates expectation.
mhm,
And again, I want to come back to culture, but I think some certain things have happened in our culture. Um, the first time I really connected some dots was when the Challenger spacecraft blew up.
mm. 85.
And here at that moment was the highest form of complicated technology and our ability to control to make something happen, and it blew up. It blew up. And that sent a shock wave in a deep, metaphorical, kind of unconscious way of the lack of control. And 9/11 did the same thing. I mean, oh my God,
Hmm.
how did they, how could this happen? I was safe. And it broke down. And I think that some of that's going on in Los Angeles.
Completely. I mean, it's this existential dread. It's this, and it's interesting when we feel this, or maybe there's this illusion of safety that we carry with us, and I think we need to carry with us in order to function. And when something bumps up against that, it's jarring on such a deep level.
Yeah.
And
And I think my idea is at the very deepest level, it has to do with mortality and impermanence.
mm,
Mortality, impermanence, and constant change. It's an existential thing, something that lives deep, deep in all of us. And
mhm,
we try for it not to emerge as
mhm.
best we can. But because of the nature of life, we keep having that confrontation that you just described.
You,
And
sorry, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, so I think there's always this powerful sense of disbelief
Hmm.
when these events happen, and sometimes personally or in a cultural context. And it's interesting that the disbelief, this isn't, I'm not talking in a judgmental way, but there's a place where we should say, hold on a minute. What do you think life is about anyway? You're acting like when I say acting, I'm not trying
Hmm.
to judge or put down, but we act as if it's a straight line.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
we wonder why we're so surprised and shocked when it's not a straight line, and life has never been a straight line. Now I know words and mind can sound really uncaring in the context
No.
of how people are experiencing things. But I think one of the things missing in our culture, it's a paradox of what how you said about a minute ago you said about being safe.
Hmm.
So the paradox is creating safe space for us while we're fully conscious that there is no safe space.
That's, ooh, Michael. Michael, you're getting into it, man. You're getting into it. And a question for you. So you and I work together on hospice, and Michael has an interesting history of helping to bring hospice into Sacramento. Um, and when you and I worked in hospice as social workers, we had to confront death daily, multiple times a day throughout. And as you just mentioned, mortality and dealing with impermanence, how did you navigate or wrestle with death and your own mortality as a hospice social worker?
Well, um, what I what I did, I don't there's so many words I don't like. Um,
Again.
the first thing, and this may sound the opposite of what I'm talking about, but I recognized when I went into a home, I wasn't dying.
Mm,
You know, death and dying will come to my door. And as you know, I actually have a terminal disease. But as social workers and part of it in our professional capacity, if I go into a home and every man that's dying is my dad dying in terms of boundaries, it and it or we imagine that we're there somehow to rescue them, that we're somehow there to save them from one of life's experiences. And that causes trouble because you can't save them. And you can only, when I say only, I want to be careful here, we can only be present.
mhm,
Now, and just a sidetrack, presence is so powerful. And we we just don't understand its power, I think. We think we're supposed to be doing stuff. And there's things to do in the context of presence. And a very powerful story, as I think I've shared with you, I spend time with homeless people on a river parkway near my house. 3 times with a man, I put out my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Michael," to shake hands, and the man has started crying. I didn't, and presence.
yeah.
All I just, it wasn't a gender or anything. It was just one human being recognizing another human being being human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't get better than that in a
No,
world that's not safe.
no.
Being present with vulnerability is the key,
You
I
know,
think.
when I was in hospice, I remember meeting with somebody in particular who had lost their husband, and she was just telling me about her grief and talking about her life. And I remember thinking, I have to see somebody later on today, but just the thought came to me, allow time to stop. Just allow time to stop. And when I had that thought, I just looked at her differently, listened, didn't think about the next person that I had to see, felt like I could see them later. And it was just an interesting switch that allowed me to connect with her in a different moment and say, all right, at 2:36 p.m., it's just me and this woman in the world right now. And let me just show up for her. And it's a
Yeah,
hard place to go to, but I remind myself often, allow time to stop. Like this, you and
yeah.
I, this is all what's
And
going on right now.
yeah, and a great lesson and I learned in hospice to help me do what you just described is I created a ritual. So when I pulled up to a house, uh, part of a poem by David White, and it says, in this high place, it is simple as this, leave everything you know behind. So in that moment, there was no other moments.
Yeah.
And so I said that to just, took a few breaths, said the poem, and kind of, being as empty, not in a way that I could measure, but creating some space.
Mhm.
And as you know, one of my favorite sayings is space creates possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next thing I did was find a tree. Often it was a tree and connect sensually with that tree. All the colors, the shape of the leaves. Is there a wind against my cheeks? What can I smell? Because what we also lose track of is nothing comes into us that is not sensual.
Mm.
Everything comes into us sensually. So I want to be empty and I want to turn on my senses so I can be present. And somebody I like, Barry Lopez, he went down to college. He's a beautiful naturalist writer. Everybody in your audience should read his stuff.
Barry
He's
Lopez.
amazing. Barry Lopez, unbelievable. And but he went down the Colorado River with um, a jazz quintet from the East Coast, and who wanted to do some really cool recordings. And there was just something he said. He said, at every bend in the river, we discovered what we could not believe or understand. I mean, every bend in the river was something new. And so, like working with the families, we we have all these ideas, and they're helpful about death and dying. But if we stay there, we can't connect to the story that's right around the bend in the river that we're walking into the house.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and that's one of the things that we're all the same and we're all unique. More
Mhm.
paradox. And I love paradox because the closer you are to paradox, the closer you are to reality.
Mm.
And and so how can I be available, my presence to, this family and um, and it served me really well. And one of the things I tried is never have an agenda. Forget about the care plan. I shouldn't be saying that, but I'm doing
Be
a little
no,
consult.
be present. Be
Yeah,
present. That's what I'm hearing.
yeah, I'm, and it isn't a judgment on us providing care, but we go in and maybe we read the care plan first out in the car. Nothing wrong with that. We want to get paid.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm working with consulting with a hospice here in our area.
Great.
And so you got a care plan, and then you realize you have to translate your experience into check boxes. Because now with the Medicare hospice benefit and concerns about one, meeting the requirements, and two, productivity, it's all check boxes.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
It's, early on in my career, the good news is I didn't have a computer. So everything I did was a handwritten narrative story. So so now I'm worried about time, where I got to be next related to productivity. And just aside, private equity companies are destroying hospice in the United States,
Mm.
absolutely destroying it. And if you're a social worker, and in fact, in my area, there's 62 for-profit hospices.
62.
Yes, and there's one, the one I'm working with, one not-for-profit community-based hospice.
Wow.
And those hospices have a relationship of 1 to 50 for the social workers.
Mm. It's untenable.
It is.
Yeah.
And, where you got to be, when you got to be, and all this stuff. So if we don't create the space, these other things like time and check boxes and care plans, and they're good things, but
Hmm.
we have to create a space to protect ourselves and our families when we're interacting, being present from those things as best we can. And for
Yeah.
me, I think the most powerful way to do that is ritual.
Hmm.
I think ritual is I haven't found anything better than the ritual I go through. To it's non-rational, it's rational, it's unconscious, conscious. I mean, it really helps.
Michael,
And it's interesting, just a minute, but
sure.
the guy, um, Vanderkolk,
Bessel van der
okay,
Kolk. Uh-huh.
yeah, he's getting a lot of pushback right now, but I like what he said. He said the purpose of therapy, he's talking in the therapy context, the the purpose of therapy is to create possibility
Mhm.
and not therapy to fix. And I think one of the things that when we're working with somebody who is in the pain of loss, one of our roles without an agenda is to be a voice of possibility.
Oh,
Yeah, could be hope. That might be another word. We have to be careful that we don't create some fantasy. Oh, you're going to be as better. When
sure.
you look back on this, you'll find out this has helped you grow into a better person, or I don't know. You know, we need not to worry about all that stuff.
Right, right, right. Michael, I gotta ask. The way you put it, you said when you walk into a house, you're not dying. Death comes at all of our doors. And then you
Yeah,
said you have a terminal illness. And so I'm
yeah,
curious how you connect that.
yeah. Well, a couple things. One is I. This is more paradox. I
Mhm.
wasn't the one dying when I went into the homes, and I think there are some things related to boundaries that are important professionally, and uh, that we need to be more conscious of. At the same time, every patient that I saw in the hospital bed was a preview. And both those things were true at the same time. Here's a preview of how
Interesting.
we are all dying, but that preview of how we're all dying isn't my dying.
Hmm. So what have you taken, or are you taking anything using that preview like example? How are you using that for your own terminal diagnosis? Or what are you taking in? What are you pushing away?
Um, well, I think one of the things is I don't fear death.
You don't. How'd you get to that point?
Well, um, first off, I may not be at that point. When I say I
Or
don't fear
maybe you're at
death,
that point right now.
yeah, when I say I don't fear death, it could be that's what I push away. Okay.
Yeah.
Although, given my experience, sometimes death and dying I often use a metaphor when I walk into the home that there may be a monster there. And in our culture, death and dying is a monster because we don't spend time with it. And not spending time with it, it always grows bigger and more fierce. So sitting with the monster. And so I've done a lot of that. So I know the monster's still there,
Mm.
but my monster is much smaller. And and um, I don't like snakes, but there's a guy at the local zoo here that loves them, is around them, knows them. Now he's still afraid of being bitten and dying, but mostly that doesn't dominate his relationship with the snake.
Sure. Hmm.
So I've had such wonderful exposure. And then the other thing is, many of my experiences have been wonderful. I mean, just magic that I've had with patients and families, just magical. And so it's not like I just, that I'm only seeing pain and vomit and whatever. Um, I and I don't know all where that comes from. I think it comes from being open to possibility,
Hmm.
and is a big part of that. So for me, I don't know that I fear death.
Okay.
What I fear is dying.
Mm.
You know,
Tell me about that.
what I well, I fear um, losing control of my body. I fear disability is what and that can show up in all kinds of ways. My disease is related to my lungs. So there will be a time where I will be in a wheelchair with oxygen and that will be my life. I fear that. Um, although um, I'm glad to be in a place where there's medical aid in dying.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a gift. And some of the most wonderful experiences I've had with people and families and dying has been medical aid and dying. It just, it's a beautiful experience. So that may be there for me, but the problem is, my disability is going to show up before I legally can participate
Mm.
in terms of, and so then I have to start thinking about suicide. And yeah, um, I wish I didn't have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and um, and I don't know what that means about the future or what I will do, what my experience will be. It's interesting with disability, and I don't know what my experience is, but the people experiencing disability do a lot better with it than the people who don't have it and are just thinking about it. So when you find out if, for example, if you found out you're going to lose a leg, oh my God, how can you live with that? But the people who lose legs have a resilience, something, but they show up and are start being present with it.
Well, it's interesting
And
going back to what you said about being a child and like you just lived. That was just your experience. Like to not like have that attachment, you weren't readily aware of that. And I think this connects to the same thing. Like if you lose something, then you just thrive. You did. I don't know. I'm trying to put this. I feel like there are no words right now for what I want to say, but I think like with what you're talking about with this disability, like life just finds a way, and life will continue to go on, and you'll find a way. You'll adapt, and whether it's resilience, whether it's hope, whether it's just the human spirit, you'll just keep on going, or not.
yeah, and that's there,
Hmm.
but we have to be careful how we represent that with people experiencing loss.
Absolutely.
We can't show up with that story. Well, too often when if we show up with that story, we're trying to cover up their pain and suffering, and we're trying to cover up our helplessness to make it different. So both of us are in a collusion not to be present. And the best you asked me to think of a few things, and um, and I hate the word advice. It's too much of an agenda or whatever. I get pretty obnoxious about words. Mostly it's been helpful to me. But Barry Lopez, who I mentioned earlier, I was reading something from him this week, and he's talking. It's amazing. The title of his book, "Embrace Fearlessly the Burning World." If we say that to Los Angeles, embrace fearlessly the burning world. Wow. And again, he's saying embrace impermanence. You know, create some safety in a totally unsafe world.
Easy to say.
And
Well, it's
but
interesting because, and I don't know
hold
anything
on a
about.
minute, hold on. That was just an introduction.
Okay.
So
All right.
he's Barry Lopez says kind of three things he put out there. He says, pay attention, number one. For me, that's being present. Okay. Two, be patient. And then three, be present with what the body knows. So I translate that when I think about loss is be present with the loss as best we can. And it's going to maybe be overwhelming. Uh, I when we're there, I don't think any of us can anticipate, even if we've been there before and had a loss and then another one shows up, it's almost like we never had the first one. I mean, we go back into our wanting things to be stable and connected. And so it's just an overwhelming experience to have to deal with reality
Mhm.
of impermanence. So as best we can, and that's where, as a social worker, where, one of the best things we can do is, share that in some kind of compassionate way, this is normal,
Mhm.
natural, uh, um, and without false hope, the gift of impermanence is that everything that comes leaves,
Yeah.
including grief.
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't go away. It gets integrated. It's like I eat a banana, it goes away, but it becomes me.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
so being present to allow our loss to become who we are, and that can turn it into a gift. Um, and the second thing related to that is be patient. You know, if we're lucky, we get 3 days off work. When I can have a child died, and in our culture, that's perceived as a very devastating loss. And I'm not saying we should have necessarily more time off work, but that notion that, get back at it.
Mhm.
And where I know I don't know all of this of which culture it is, even now, but there's people now in some cultures where they wear black for a year.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think I like that it's acknowledging be patient. And this is a disruption beyond what we can comprehend. And it has to be sort of digested. I don't know if that's the right word, but that digestion is an integration and to be patient. And then the last thing where he says, be present with the body knows. What I would tell people, well, God, I like that. I'd encourage people, invite. I like the word invite,
Invite's
create
good.
invite,
Invite's good.
and create invitations. And we have to be as conscious of ourselves of how to make an invitation. But so be present with the loss, create space and time. And then the other thing, be as sensual as you can. Go for a walk. Be in the world of sensuality. Go and because if we allow the grief to separate us from the world, I think then it has the capacity to be more problematic uh, in terms of being stuck.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting though, because I don't think
and
anybody sets out to have their grief separate them from the world, but grief can just be so
yeah,
consuming that that it seems too unfathomable to even integrate
yeah.
this grief. And
Well, let me
yeah.
share a crazy metaphor.
Hmm.
So one of the things loss does is it hits us in the face or heart with impermanence and vulnerability. Okay. So sometimes I use being naked as a metaphor for vulnerability. And I think as you as a therapist and the work we've done, we really have to be aware, especially in griefs, that people get sometimes more naked than they want or struggle to get naked in the vulnerability. So let's imagine for a moment you've had this loss and you're naked. Okay. Are you going to walk out the door?
Most likely
No.
not. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And that's what happens. We don't necessarily, because I've gone to some naked hot springs places. It's kind of cool. I'd recommend it to everybody. But what's interesting, there you can be naked in that sense. And almost everybody has a sense of vulnerability about actually being naked. But it's, but if the world says the last thing you can be is naked, you don't want to go out the door. And the door is the world of possibility.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's where um, being present with the nakedness over time can, let's say, as somebody in a helping role, and being with it and honor, still want to work with boundaries, but we have to honor our own nakedness in the process of being with their nakedness. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
us and them or me and them. This is us.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, they're in a part of the story that is and will be part of my story. We're in the same story. And we may not be at the same time, although like it's interesting, and I apologize for that word, interesting in Los Angeles that you have
Hmm.
a lot of people in the same story.
Hmm.
Not the same experience, but the same story. And um, and that one of the things that there's a somebody related to grief that talks about what we miss is the experience of mourning. He says that's really important. And if I remember right, he said that means sharing our grief in public. And what's possibly a really good thing in Los Angeles is because this pain is being experienced in the context of community.
Yeah. And community has really shown up. It's really shown
Right.
up.
And
Mm,
yeah, and once you get a whole city naked, it's cool. I mean,
mhm,
it puts a different dimension to this.
mhm.
But mostly when we die onesies and twosies, and we don't die in a context of community and mourning.
Yeah.
And that's where the folks that wear black, um, you know, are trying to put that in a communal context. And that's a whole nother story about community and it's like in a tribe. I imagine when there's a loss, let's say a loss of a child in an indigenous tribe, there obviously I think is heartbreak in the parents, but I think the rest of the tribe has a heartbreak too because they're they're um,
They're
they're an
connected.
entity amongst, yeah,
Yeah.
they're connected. They're connected. And I want to just interject something that's a little bit off, but it's becoming important to me. Everybody right now is appropriately, I don't like that word, but in this place of devastation,
Mhm.
like in Los Angeles, and all the things that can come with that word. Okay, what would happen, do you think, if 7 times the people in Los Angeles built their house again and it burned down again? And they built their house again and it burned down again. And they built their house again and it burned down again. Oh my God. Actually, that happened to a family here in Northern California. Not quite that, but they were in the Paradise Fire. Their house and everything got destroyed. They had insurance. They rebuilt in a different part of the foothills and then were totally destroyed in the park fire without insurance. I don't know where the story goes from there. But what I want to share, if we want to really talk about the community and we are an us, please, please open your heart to what happens to homeless people when they're swept. A 73-year-old woman in Sacramento was swept by
Mhm.
public service 7 times. 7 times she lost everything she owned, and 7 times she lost her shelter. They took or destroyed her tent. 7 times. And LA is having a hard time dealing with this once. Once. There's no Red Cross for her. There's no community. There's no fundraising events. World Kitchen doesn't show up for her the next day. That's what the homeless experience is in this country.
Mhm.
We are the fire for homeless people. We are the fire. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I would appreciate people sitting with that.
Mhm.
And but anyway, I have a lot of affection
No.
and respect for homeless folks. They've taught me everything.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit off, but
Mhm.
how do we hold this stuff? And I think that idea of, and it's not to fend off the grief, but by being sensual, you can't, being sensual means you're in the moment. And it doesn't make our grief go away. That we're not trying to do that. We don't want to do it.
Mhm.
If we make it go away, the all the possibility it holds will never show up. But it's important to be physical, and I think It's also, I'm thinking a little bit of trauma theory right now, which is a moving target,
Hmm.
but we also want to not get stuck in helplessness.
Yeah. Wait,
And
Michael, hold on. I want to bring it back to you for a second. Are you grieving yourself? And are you grieving the
yeah,
life that you're living? How is grief showing up for you that you have a terminal illness?
well, I don't know. I
Hmm.
mean, um, remember, I'm at the deep end of the pool, and um, so I certainly can use, for lack of better words, sort of intellectual imagination. It's been a safe place for me all my life.
Hmm.
But not just safe like escape or denial, but safe. And um, so in that sense, I'm just an amazing, interesting part of the mystery right now.
It's interesting.
And
Like it's like you're looking at it with curiosity.
yeah,
Detached is maybe not the best word, but like
yeah.
looking at it from an outside point of view.
Well, curiosity is a good word,
Hmm.
and curiosity every day is how to be present in the world.
Yeah.
When we step out of our, when you and I talked, you talked about the interview we had. The number one thing I want when I hire somebody is curious. I want a curious cat because a curious cat is alive. They're sniffing, they're looking, they're
Mhm.
touching, they're imagining. And, one of the things, this is aside, but we need to ask about our education system. Are we helping kids become alive in their curiosity, or are we stifling it in terms of fitting into some of the boxes we hope or want?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so I'm curious. Now, on the other hand, had some tears the other day
Mm.
when I was thinking about taking our Christmas lights off the house and recognizing, wow, within me, I mean, it wasn't intellectual, it's emotional. Ooh, this is the last time I'm ever going to take the lights off the house. Ooh. And I think I don't know if I could prescribe this for other people, but in the world of impermanence, I think it can be helpful to be with all your last times.
Mm.
Be present with your last times. Um, I forget when I came upon it, maybe in my 30s, but I was never going to buy a softball mitt again. I had an old Rocky Colavito mitt. That was the last time. I have a person that's doing some work for us here at home, and he has a son, and I gave him my mountain bike, his son, and there was sadness in that. Um, there was sadness. I'll say a tear. I don't know that I did actually have tears. That's irrelevant, but a sadness came up with me recognizing they'll never ride it again.
Mm.
And that's something that is gone from my life, gone from my life. And something gone from your life happens every frickin' day.
I'm feeling a heaviness right now, Michael. I appreciate you bringing this in. Like, I'm
Yeah,
feeling it. That's powerful. It's really powerful. You know,
yeah.
yeah. Did you talk to anybody about when you took the lights down and you had that moment, or
Oh,
did you just hold it?
You know James? Remember
Yeah.
James?
Hmm.
Yeah, he and I get together every couple of weeks. We're getting together tonight.
Okay.
I think I've shared that with him. I've shared it some of it with my wife.
Hmm.
Um, and it's important when I'm sharing this, and there, like you said, this heaviness. I don't know exactly what that means for you,
Hmm.
and I'm not trying to deny that we have last times every day, but we also have first times every day. And if you don't experience the last times, you will never know the first times. That's the gift of loss and possibility. And
Hmm.
I mean, life is amazing. I am just, I mean it. Life is
Life
amazing.
really is. Life really, and I
I
think that's why
mean,
you and I connected because both of us can experience the beauty and feel the amazement of life. And I think
yeah,
it's the energy that comes from you and I talking is special. And I feel like you don't get to meet a lot of people like you, Michael.
thank you. Same
Yeah.
for you. And let me share something from that kind of in a metaphor kind of captures this. And it's a poet I like named Mary Oliver. And I can't share the poem in the way she does, but the ending of the poem is just amazing. And the poem sounds kind of crazy because she loves nature, and the frog she loves gets eaten by the heron she loves, life. And the end of the poem, she says, I wear black and I dance. I wear black and I dance. Whew.
Hmm. Yeah.
Even if it seems like paradox, and and it's not supposed to make sense.
Mhm.
And you know, yeah, keep on dancing. Um,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
I mean, holding these, I don't know. You can't separate stuff. And when we start separating it, you know, like,
Yeah.
and I'm just being obnoxious. Oh, Michael, let's talk about grief. Okay. You can't talk about grief without talking about the mystery and everything it holds.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it, uh, I know we do, and it can be helpful and makes us think we know what we're doing for a few minutes. Um, and that's where I also am big on metaphor. And like, for example, I was reading about a woman. She's one of America's best mountain climbers and Mount Everest and all those places. And she's lost a lot of friends, and many of them she's lost through death at mountain climbing. And she said her grief was broken glass. So I'm going to put that together for her. Is she going to be able to put that together again?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was kind of imagining if I could ask her, well, not ask her something, but, so where's the blood, the bleeding related to the broken glass? I don't know that there is, but that idea of, and, and we're not going to put it together again. And I
Yeah.
think we have to understand that, you know, grief counseling, grief therapy, grief groups, we can't put the glass together again.
Michael, I laugh because I remember when you first told me about your terminal illness, you said that you were sent to a therapist for a few sessions. And I remember you saying to me that no 4 or 6 sessions of CBT or whatever is gonna help you navigate coming to grips with this terminal illness. And I thought that was really interesting how you frame that.
Yeah. And, um, well, and, again, Vanderkolk, I spent a couple days with him, and I remember him, from his point of view, saying, I'm not interested in your frontal cortex.
Mm,
I'm interested in your limbic system. And I don't know all the things there, but fear,
mhm,
emotional attachment, um, you know, living as Barry Lopez, living fiercely in a burning world. I think what many of us are feeling since Trump got elected. You know, LA had a real burning
yeah.
of the
Hmm.
world,
Hmm.
and I think many of us perceive with Trump we have a burning of our world.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in LA, we found out we couldn't put out the fire.
Yeah.
And I think that experience and metaphor of the LA fire concerns me with, can we put out the fire of Trump?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's hard. And but that's where also, not we being in the physical world, involving your senses means that's the part where we're not helpless.
Yeah.
There's a Japanese calligraphy that means 7 times down, 8 times up, and it's not a should. And like I'm mentoring a homeless woman right now, she's probably 98 times down, 99
Hmm.
times up. She's amazing. I mean, she, when I get down, I think about her.
Hmm.
And that's another thing people don't realize about the homeless people is the gifts that they have, not that they want to have them, but that life has forced them. Resilience, imagination, courage. If you were hiring people, that's who you want to hire. Everybody wants to hire somebody who's real resilient, has
Right,
imagination.
right, right.
That's
Mi-
them. That's
Michael,
it.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
hop in. We have time for one final thought. Okay. One final
Hmm.
thought.
Hmm. Um, we've been talking about this a lot, but a line I like from Emily Dickinson, dwell in possibility. And um, and it's important when I say possibility, that doesn't mean we're dwelling in something. Possibility comes from emptiness. Emptiness is the source of infinite possibility. So when I say possibility, I don't mean dwell and that you're going to be a professional basketball player. I mean dwell in the emptiness of possibility. So,
Final thought with Michael. Michael,
yeah,
thank you.
thank you. Kind of fun today. I